So it is 9:35. We've got a very important conversation to have right now because we are less than 6 months away from the election that is going to decide whether or not we remain a capitalist constitutional republic or whether we devolve into a socialist hellhole, which is the path that we are on right now. We have to win these elections, and in order to win the elections, we have to make sure that the elections are free, fair, valid, authentic, and with integrity. We have to make sure that we don't have non-citizens voting, and we have to make sure that citizens only get to vote once. We know the problems from 2020. Well, there's an organization, we spoke with Marley Hornick a few weeks back about this, an organization called United Sovereign Americans, which is working very, very hard to develop a strategy to secure the validity of the elections coming up in less than 6 months. And they found some irregularities and some question marks about the voter rolls in the state of Ohio. A lawsuit apparently has been planned against the Secretary of State in order to clean all of these things up. I asked Secretary of State Frank LaRose a little bit earlier this week about that. I want to let you hear what Frank LaRose had to say. Then we're going to bring Marley Hornick back on to talk a little bit more about what this is going to take.
We don't have a statewide voter registration database that I maintain autonomously. What we have is 88 county lists that we aggregate together into a statewide list. So what that means is we've got 88 different sets of fingers on 88 different keyboards doing, I would hope, their level best to do data entry accurately, but sometimes things get missed as a result of maybe handwriting that they can't read or just a human error. And so those are the kind of things that we work to try to keep accurate. But again, listen, this is a problem in all 50 states. I think that Ohio does a better job of this than any other state in the country, but it's never perfect. And this is why when groups like this have something, I'd ask them to come to us instead of, trying to make a name for themselves by filing a lawsuit or by, holding events around the state. How about you come and meet with the folks that are responsible for this and show us your work, show us your data. And if there are things that we can correct, then I'd love to work with our boards of elections to do that. Again, this is something that we've got a whole team of people working on a daily basis to make sure that we keep it accurate. But as you mentioned, it's a challenging process to maintain a database of 8 million people.
All right, so that was the response in part from the Secretary of State Frank LaRose. Joining us now is Marley Hornick, again, co-founder of the United Sovereign Americans organization that is working to secure the integrity of our voter rolls and our elections. Marley, good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning, Bob. Thanks so much for having me on again to talk about the work of United Sovereign Americans.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So you heard the Secretary, he declared that, there can be problems despite the best efforts of people working in the 88 different boards in the 88 counties. There can be mistakes, there can be errors, there can be problems that need to be corrected, and the voter rolls do need to be cured. Come and talk to me. That's what he said. But instead of filing a lawsuit and trying to, quote-unquote, make a name for yourselves, how do you respond to him?
Well, there's so much that I need to say, so hopefully we have a couple minutes here.
We do.
On January 19th of 2024, United Sovereign Americans, the state chapter directors for Ohio, submitted a comprehensive report to Secretary of State Frank LaRose that was received in person by his chief legal counsel that contains not only the entire set of registration records that we found concerning, but actually a comprehensive report explaining how we use these particular SQL queries to extract them from the statewide registration database. I'm going to read you a little bit of the language from the cover letter that was submitted again in January of 2024 to Secretary LaRose's office. As can be seen from the attached report, it appears that there are serious breaches of statutory standards on both the federal and state level required by law. In some cases, millions of potential voter irregularities/registration cases would either need to be explained or classified as illegal votes. And then we continue on. If you choose to dismiss the facts forming the basis of this inquiry, further action will be pursued. We would hope, however, that the factual anomalies are investigated and satisfactorily explained. Our concern is that the resulting election certifications were made despite objective, factual data raising concerns that the state had massively compromised systems and the certifications may represent serious disregard of the voter's civil and constitutional rights. That's the cover letter for the comprehensive report submitted to Secretary LaRose, again, on January 19th, 2024.
Okay, and what kind of a response did you get from that, Marley?
Well, what we got back was a letter from Josh Jaffe, who is the manager for data analytics within the Secretary of State's office, asserting that what we had found were not concerning. They looked like a bunch of clerical errors, and they were probably related to short staffing at the local boards of elections.
Which is very similar to what Secretary LaRose said to me earlier this week. He talked about the 88 different boards and talked about how, absolute human error can account for a number of these things. But obviously that didn't satisfy you guys, right?
Well, the thing is there is room for error in a voting system. The amount of error that is tolerated within a voting system is defined by law. The problem is they're out of compliance. So, for example, in the 2022 midterm election in Ohio, the state was technically allowed about 34 ballots in error statewide. So these could be explained by perhaps a clerical error inside of a registration record. The record was not actually valid, but it was, for whatever reason, it was passed through the system. The problem is our numbers show that the Ohio midterm had 713,262 unresolved voting errors. So we're not saying there can't be error, but we're saying the law describes the amount of error tolerated before an investigation has to proceed. And that's what
when you say, I'd like some clarification, Marley. When you say 713,000 voting violations, are we talking about illegal votes cast, or are we talking about voter roll in irregularities or inconsistencies? What exactly do we mean by a voting violation?
Right. There are instances where a registration record has a disqualifying error but cast a vote. So
we're talking about the ones where because I read some of these when I was talking to the secretary the other day.
Exactly.
253,000 who voted, supposedly registered on January 1st. 84,000 of them registered on on a federal holiday, and then on a Sunday, places when they could not have registered. So these are the quote voting violations we're talking about. Okay, so tell me this. Tell me this. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I want to read to you from the
We're going to go back and forth
Justice.
here because we're on a delay, apparently, a little bit. Yeah, please go ahead and finish your thought on the Department of Justice, then I'll ask a follow-up. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is the Department of Justice publishes a book called Federal Prosecution of Election Offenses, and I'm going to cite from the December 2017 8th edition. Types of election crimes. Election fraud is corruption of obtaining and marking of ballots, counting and certification of election results, or registration of voters. And an example of conduct that constitutes federal election fraud is submitting fictitious names to election officers for inclusion on voter registration rolls, thereby qualifying those voters to vote in federal elections. So the presence of these registration records and the quantities in which they exist is suspicious. It doesn't mean we're suspicious of Secretary LaRose. Just to be clear, we don't know who we're suspicious of. That's why we asked him to run an investigation. It's a normal procedure that you would do when you discover that there are clearly massive amounts of invalid data in your system.
Okay. Let me follow up with a little bit of information that I've gotten from a source who's kind of close to this. And by the way, if you just tuned in, we're talking to Marley Hornick. She is the co-founder of United Sovereign Americans, and they have you filed the suit, by the way? Do I want to say filed or threatening a lawsuit?
We're preparing to file a lawsuit. We certainly would be happy to meet with him in that, and we actually had rented a hotel boardroom for that purpose on the, under the auspice that he was going to come, but that didn't end up happening.
Okay. So I want to share a little bit of this with you. According to something I've been told, the vast majority of the numbers that you have put out about illegal voters or irregularities or inconsistencies in Ohio are cleared up within the 20-day post-election certification curing period, which the legislature mandated. And I am told that all but about 3,000 of that 713,000 were indeed cured after the election. The problem is they are not adjudicated before the election certification as federal law requires. Is that accurate to your knowledge?
Unfortunately, it's not. They're confusing oranges and apples, although it's easy to make that mistake. So there are two different kinds of violations that we believe we have uncovered within the midterm certification process. One of them has to do with this is what I believe this information you're talking about is referring to, where at the time the Ohio 2022 midterm was certified, there were 1,162,000 more votes counted than the voter rolls listed as voters who had voted. And it's true that there is a law in Ohio state statute that says that's not a big deal. You can certify an election with 1.16 million more votes counted than voters who voted because they can have 20 days to update the records after they certify. Now, to me, that's inane, and I don't think if you tried to file your taxes on that basis, you would receive a favorable audience with the IRS. However, it is Ohio state statute, and it is true that at the end of the 20-day period, or I think it actually is more about 30 days from when we were measuring, most of those go away. Is that a legal process? I don't think so, but it is the law right now. That's not the same thing as the 713,000 voting violations. That has nothing to do with that. Those are votes with no voter. The voting violations we're citing are the ones where the registration record shows a vote, but the registration record is invalid. And it's not clear how an invalid voter was able to register to vote in Ohio and equal the weight of your vote or the valid eligible citizen registrants of the state of Ohio.
So, Marley, let's go back to then working this out. Secretary LaRose, from what I am told, was ready and willing to meet with you guys a few weeks back in Medina, and that was unable to be arranged for whatever reason, but he indicated absolutely he would meet with USA. But since you raised the money that you need to file a federal lawsuit and are now threatening that lawsuit or preparing it, as maybe is a better word, now it's potentially it's not the right move to meet with you and discuss these things if there is pending litigation. If you guys drop your lawsuit or announce you are not going to file this lawsuit, and the secretary says, great, now let's sit down at a table in a room somewhere and hash all of this out, would that satisfy you, or do you really feel you need to go to the courts?
That's a very good question. We would be happy to meet with Secretary LaRose and are continuing to pursue that as a possibility. Again, we've been pursuing a meeting with Secretary LaRose since January 19th. And, basically we sent them this report discussing serious matters, and they sent us a response saying, hey, looks like 1.2 million clerical errors to us. Have a nice day. So I personally am not going to back down on anything, but I am happy to meet with Secretary LaRose, and I would much prefer, we would all prefer to launch and assist with, if that's needed or if it's required, assist with a legitimate investigation. The problem is we gave Secretary LaRose everything he could possibly need to run an investigation back in January. So our concern is that, are we just running out the clock here on the citizens of Ohio? So that's where our concern is, and that's where our allegiance lies. If Secretary LaRose wants to have a meeting, absolutely. I'm going to be back in Ohio next week. I would love to sit down with him. And actually, we have apprised his chief of staff of those dates.
And what was the
whether
response?
or not he chooses to, The response again was, hey, well, because you're going to maybe file a lawsuit, we can't meet with you. I just, this is not a game. This is what I have to say, Bob. This is not a game. We're talking about our country. We're talking about our people. We're talking about our elders who died alone in hospitals. We're talking about our kids getting indoctrinated with garbage ideology. We're talking about fentanyl pouring over our border. We're talking about illegal aliens pouring over our border. And this man who is paid by the citizens of the state of Ohio to administer your elections accurately and according to the law is going to come on the radio and say to your people, all the people of Ohio, he's going to say, I can't meet with them because they're threatening to sue me because I'm not responding to their report. That is not how mature, responsible people in positions of authority deal with it.
I can understand and sympathize with and even support to a great degree your frustration, but I'm trying to think of this from a legal perspective. If there's a pending lawsuit or a threat of a lawsuit, it probably wouldn't be in his best interest or the state of Ohio's best interest to sit down with you and meet and go over all of these things and lay all of the cards on the table, because then if you decide you're not satisfied and you go through with the suit, he's just given you all kinds of information and discovery that could be used against him and against the state. So I can see where he's coming from, where he says...
We gave him... No, there's a problem with your thinking. Is
Right.
This is what I have to say. If we were 100% transparent with Secretary LaRose, because we want this fixed, we don't want a lawsuit. We want this repaired. And on January 19th, we submitted a 125-page report citing every Ohio statute we think might have been relative to our findings, the federal statutes, and we provided every single one of these registration records for him to review and his staff to review, as well as the code itself that we used to extract it from the statewide voter registration database. How come they stood down on that investigation? How come now the response is that we're the problem? This was thousands of volunteer hours of work done by people who love this country. I am not impressed with his response. And I don't think that he has to provide us with any information that would compromise discovery. There is no discovery. The only document in question is the statewide voter registration database, and it's available to the public. You can download it. So The issue is not whether or not he's somehow compromising his position. The issue is whether or not the Ohio 2024 general election is going to be valid under the law for the people of Ohio.
So Marley, and thank you for that explanation and clarification. So let's say for a second that he says, okay, I'll roll the dice here and I'll sit down with you guys. What exactly, when you do that, are you going to be asking him to do? What exactly are you going to be looking to accomplish in that meeting?
Actually, there's no reason to have a meeting, to tell you the truth, because everything that we were asking for was provided in the report on January 19th. We said we are submitting, I'll read it again. We are...
No, you don't have to read it again. I remember I read it. Yeah, it's okay.
Of statutory standards, and we're asking for an investigation. It looks like there may be a breach in the integrity of Ohio's voting system. We're not accusing Secretary LaRose of doing anything untoward. We really are not. We're saying it looks like there's a major problem here, and someone has to figure out what happened before we can have a 2024 election.
Okay.
And that's the job of the Secretary of State. It's the job of the investigative agencies.
Do you feel like, Marley, and does the organization feel like this 713,000, violations that you've discovered, did it change the results in either the 2020 or 2022 midterm elections? Or, and maybe this is even a better question, in this past November at the when it came to the abortion, the abortion without restriction special constitutional amendment issue, do you feel like the irregularities or these voting violations, as you caused them, affected the outcome of those elections in any measurable way, or you just want to make sure that they don't affect the upcoming one?
Here's the best way to look at that question. Based on the number of votes in error out of the 2022 midterm in Ohio, there was a 14% voting error rate.
Okay.
You have a congressional race with a 5.4% margin of victory. The problem is not whether that race was correctly, whether the outcome is correct or whether the wrong person was chosen. The problem is that there's actually no way to know what the actual outcome of that election was. When your voting error rate is greater than the margin of victory, concerning especially congressional races, you no longer have certainty that it is truly the will of the people that is choosing the representative. The intent of the voters is no longer clear, and you had 5 congressional races that fall into that category where the margin of victory is smaller than the error rate in voting. So again, United Sovereign Americans is not saying that we have some magic wand and we know what the outcome of any of those elections was supposed to be. The problem is Secretary LaRose doesn't know either. And the question is, how in the heck did that happen? And how can we prevent it from happening in 2024? Now, again, January was 5 months ago, right? So that's a lot of time to burn up not taking any of these concerns seriously on behalf of the citizen voters of the state of Ohio.
So your next step is what? Are we filing? Is that the next step, or where do you want to go?
We are continuing to prepare our lawsuit, and if we are able to come to some kind of an actual sitting down at the table, which again, we don't need to sit down at the table. He has everything. We're willing to sit down at the table and be helpful, because our concern is our children. That's what we're concerned about. And Secretary LaRose should be concerned about that, too, as a representative of the people of Ohio. So whether or not we have to sit down at the table and talk through it, that's fine. We'll do it. I've done that. Many people across this country have done that, and we'll do it again because of our love for our country. But it's not going to stop us from preparing litigation if he's not going to act.
Got it. All right. Well, listen, I'm glad you clarified so much of this information. I think we're going to stay in regular contact with the Secretary as well between now and November, so I will try to present some of this to him the next time we get a chance to talk, and I know you guys are going to reach out as well. Hopefully, we can solve this without having to go to court, that an investigation is conducted, and that everything that needs to be cleaned up is cleaned up. I know everybody has the same goals in mind here. Obviously, we need to see some action being taken. Marley Hornick, United Sovereign Americans, thank you so much for the time this morning. I appreciate your information.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate your having us on again.
You got it. Thank you so much.